Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. Now today I want to talk about childhood wounds that you might need to heal, which are sabotaging your present. And you may have heard the phrase, if it's hysterical, it's probably historical. So I guess the message here is that often if we are experiencing a lot of difficulties in our relationships, in our life, things that are going on in the present, it is usually rooted in things from our past. But often this is quite unconscious and we're not even aware of it. Okay, so let's dive in. Now I know in our quick fix world of 30-day overhauls and miracle detox weight loss plans, all the quick fix stuff, it can be so tempting to wish the same for the healing process. My clients will often say, I don't want to talk about my childhood, just give me some tools and strategies so I can move forward. Now, although I'm not an advocate for stewing for years in the childhood memory swamp, retelling old stories on repeat, whilst gaining profound insights with little change, I do believe that some focus on your early life can be hugely beneficial for healing. Now, this is not to seek traumas that don't exist or attempt to make meaning out of something that has little meaning whatsoever, because sometimes a spade is just a spade, but instead to help move historical blocks that are limiting life today. Because if these are ignored, you might be plastering over a gaping wound with the prettiest plaster, maybe the tool, but having to keep changing it at regular intervals whilst the wound still seeps. Now, no number of positive affirmations by your conscious mind can override an unconscious psyche that is drowning in fear and negativity. And this is not to say that positive affirmations don't have their place. I'm just saying that we need to go deeper for the real healing. So I'm going to explore some key areas from your past that are helpful to gain insight and understanding about to help you heal. So number one, dealing with your reality rather than a fantasy version. So let me explain a bit more here. So your parents and other significant adults, grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers, authority figures in your early life were mainly brought up in a different generation. Mental health was barely understood or discussed, and self-care was not a word in the dictionary, and old gender roles were lived out as norms, which significantly impacted relationships. Now, if you're in the UK, and I think probably true for many other places too, the British stiff upper lip ruled with an unspoken but realised mantra to live by. As long as it all looks fine to the outside world, never mind what goes on behind closed doors. It was all about kind of what everyone else thought, things looked like. As long as everything looked really wonderful, all well and good. So mostly emotions were not discussed, mental health issues were viewed as weakness, and trauma was an expected part of living. You just got on with it. And people were generally doing the best they knew at the time, but with little awareness. And most of your parents' generation carried transgenerational trauma, and many have never had therapy. So this is going to naturally have had an impact then on you. Now, this is not about chastising or berating these adults. Although if you experience abuse or neglect, you will understandably be carrying rage, a lot of difficult feelings, and may need some extremely strong boundaries and contact with those adults. But in most cases, probably for most of you listening, you probably felt loved and had your physical needs predominantly met in your early life. And you likely have some beautiful memories and strong attachments to these early relationships. But in many cases, I think particularly if you're in middle age now, you won't have had your emotional needs fully met. Now, because your parents likely didn't have theirs met either. So they didn't have the manual or the lived experience. They didn't know what they were doing. And this was a generation where some children would have just sat in the car with a bag of crisps while parents were in the pub. This wasn't abnormal. Children were not centralised as they are today. Children often had to just get on with it and deal with emotional issues alone or with their friends. So consequently, you may have experienced several life-impacting events between the ages of 0 and 15 years old where you never stopped or emotionally processed what happened. And you may never have explored the impact of different encounters and triggers. And these micro and macro aggressions build up as energy in the body and are held as trauma. Now, if you're a younger millennial or Gen Z, you may have parents who are radically more self-aware than previous generations. And this is something to be so thankful for. Mostly Generation X parents are dutiful, really conscientious, attempting to swing the emotional pendulum in the opposite direction and are far more attuned to their offspring. But the reality is as well that unconscious wounding passes on. And I say this as a flawed Generation X parent myself. For every one of us, your early life has a profound influence on your adult experience. Now, this can be hugely challenging to take on board, as you will love your parents and the other significant relationships, and you will have a strong desire to protect and hold them in highest regard. The child is always loyal to the parents, even when situations have been painful and difficult. But I guess what's important here, that if you're living in a fantasy of a perfect childhood that was truly far from perfect, as you will have been raised by flawed humans, this will keep you stuck in reliving old traumas. So what to take away from this? Really develop self-awareness and understanding of the impact of parenting, the early life, your early life events, your significant losses, your friendship issues, your traumas. This can all be incredibly helpful for healing. And it's not only talking about these events, but in the safety of healthy relationships, in therapy or with close friends, it's revisiting and experiencing the emotions around these events to release the feelings and heal. And it's through compassionate acknowledgement of the past wounding and a reparenting of the self to offer soothing and unconditional support, which offers the doorway to healing. Because unacknowledged trauma will bubble under the surface of your daily life, rearing its head in unconscious ways. Whereas once the trauma is released and processed, you are free to move on and create more constructive, fulfilling ways of being in the world. And you can have deep empathy and love for your parents and early caregivers while still acknowledging your own wounding and unmet needs in the process. Okay, number 2, projection. So every significant relationship in the present time will be impacted by your earliest important relationships. In many cases, this will be relationships with your mother and father, but it could also include relationships with grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, teachers, and anyone else who was important in your formative years. Now, these relationships tend to form the template for your interaction with other human beings. So, a warm, validating relationship with a mother or sister will likely lead to greater trust in the feminine and forming close bonds with women in your adult life. A critical or envious relationship with a mother could lead to a lack of trust in the feminine and difficulties in forming connections that feel safe with women in adulthood. And encouraging an attuned relationship with your father or brother could foster higher levels of self-belief and safety with men, whereas a judgmental or absent father could lead to a feeling of a lack of safety with a masculine and low self-worth as an adult. And of course, there's much nuance and flexibility in individual circumstances. So say, for example, if your father was absent but your grandfather was a huge supporter of you, this may have offered a highly protective and long-term beneficial impact on your well-being. But if you're struggling in your relationships today with friends, siblings, or romantic encounters, the past will hold some answers. You'll probably be projecting your past experiences unconsciously onto your present relationships. Now, I know for me personally, having an incredibly loving mother and supportive relationships with my sisters, I've always found that my relationships with women have been fairly straightforward and natural. You know, my mother truly celebrated us as individuals. There was no competition or envy, rather it being about mutual support, love and encouragement. And this has massively helped me in adulthood to form female friendships easily. There are no blocks and it feels safe. You know, I just expect in a way that I can get on easily with women. And because I show up in my relationships in that way, on the whole, my relationships have been more straightforward. But in contrast, my wounding is distinctly more apparent around the masculine. You know, I had a complicated relationship with my dad who experienced significant trauma and pain in his life. And this made it extremely difficult for him to support my sisters and I, there being much criticism and judgment. So until very recently, I've struggled in my romantic relationships with men, often feeling insecure, being drawn to emotionally avoidant people, where I attempted to prove my worth and feel good enough. It's almost like repeating unconsciously those old patterns with my dad, which felt familiar. So healing can only occur when you bring awareness of your projections into the present and you begin to see the person in front of you now rather than labeling on stories and projections from the past. And this takes time, patience, and understanding to navigate through these issues. So the takeaway here, think about your early relationships and the impact on your psyche. Note with honesty the positive and negative aspects of these interactions. And notice where old projections are playing out in your life today and preventing you from achieving authentic connection. And you may need the support of therapy to guide you through the unknown waters. So 3, emotional triggers from past events. So if it's hysterical, it's likely historical. So emotions are part of life. They're valuable messengers giving you feedback about your internal state and your interactions with the world. And a healthy emotional regulation involves listening to emotions but not being ruled by them either. And it's common for most humans to be holding unprocessed emotions in the body. Buried emotions never processed can erupt like a violent volcano. The experience can be overwhelming to the human psyche. Now, this might be experienced maybe if you have uncontrolled crying at some point, which you feel like, where has this come from? Or you feel absolute rage over something that just feels like a small thing. Buried emotions can also result in depression and extreme anxiety, with many unexpressed feelings laying beneath. It's very common with depression that there's many things underneath depression, often a lot of sadness, maybe a lot of anger, and with extreme anxiety as well. If you're someone that's always ruminating about things and worrying about things in the present moment, again, you probably have other deeper emotions beneath. Now, if you disproportionately as well react to a present day event, which seems a bit extreme in relation to the event itself, this is likely linked to an unprocessed childhood experience. So for example, if you were relentlessly criticised by a teacher or parent, any feedback in your adult life could be interpreted as extreme judgment and chastisement. So an innocent constructive comment from your boss could plummet you into a shame spiral, which is far more about your early trauma than the present interaction. But it won't feel this way. Your conscious mind won't likely make that connection. Another example, if you experienced a period of your life where you strongly disliked your body and you were depressed and alone in that period, as an adult, any weight gain, even if objectively healthy for you, might trigger feelings of disgust and humiliation as old emotional wounds are activated. But again, it's much more about the past than the present moment. So the takeaways: know that if something is hysterical, it's likely historical. Be kind and compassionate with yourself though. Take time to journal or talk about your feelings to make sense of them, because you will likely be triggered many, many times in the healing process. So appreciate that some focus on your history can be valuable in interrupting old ways of coping and stopping that sabotage that comes into your present day living. You don't need, though, to stew in the juices of old stories for years, sort of on the couch, in therapy. Rather, your past can be a gateway to self-understanding and healing. And be patient with yourself on this journey and do seek support as needed. Thank you so much for listening today. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out, the Eating Disorder Therapist _. And further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'll be so grateful if you'd follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.